Hi, I'm Chris. If you're white like me, you may be worried that black people like these, scary, are going to take over and then kill all of us. If so, you probably support the police and the National Guard as they shoot, gas, and arrest protesters, and maybe even those civilians ramming into them with their cars. The good news is your fears are all in your head. Black power is not the same as white power. And unless you're a white supremacist, you have nothing to worry about. If I had a friend who told me they couldn't sleep because their house was haunted, I would do what I could to show them ghosts aren't real and they can't hurt you. This video is so my fellow white people stop being afraid of the specter of black power.
And what you and I have to let the man know is we are peaceful people. We are loving people. We love everybody who loves us. But we don't love anybody who doesn't love us. We're nonviolent with people who are nonviolent with us. But we are not nonviolent with anyone who is violent with us.
Historically, white and black power have been two extremely different things. There's something about the white settler ideology that attempts to eradicate or extinguish problems. So there are animals and insects eating your crops. Exterminate them. Native plant species popping up on your sterile grass lawn. Uproot every one of them. Native people in the way of your logging enterprise? Better kill them too. Or at least force them to leave their ancestral homes and keep them poor so there's nothing they can do about it. That's the colonization of North America in a nutshell. I'm not quite sure where this way of seeing the world comes from, so if you know, let me know in the comments, but it's certainly developed over a few hundred years. There's a certain Manichaeanism, seeing the world as divided into good and evil in American Christianity. That's why it's so easy for Americans to leap towards evil and terrorists to describe anyone who rocks the boat. If you're not with us, you're against us, and against God, therefore, too. And those against us should be wiped out, or at least subordinated, so we don't have to worry about them. White nationalist ideology has always embodied this mindset, as it considers entire groups of people problems and obstacles, and their answer is genocide. But the movements of the colonized people against white supremacy are not its mirror image. Unlike white nationalists, colonized people know killing millions of people is not a path to freedom, and there's no justice in suffering. Unlike white nationalists, when black and indigenous people rise up, they know the biggest risks are to themselves. Any racialized minority that gains consciousness and rises up in any fashion is met with violence. The most peaceful demonstrations, if they posed any threat to the established racial hierarchy, were given the state's fullest attention. Laws were passed to criminalize dissent. The police, sometimes with their friends in the KKK, frequently broke up protests and strikes. And when I say broke up, I mean cracked some heads. The FBI instituted COINTELPRO to break up organizations like the Black Panthers and the American Indian Movement and kill their members, and continues to use the same tactics today, though they don't call it COINTELPRO anymore. Unlike these right-wingers, I listen to black people. Now, obviously, that's a really diverse group with as many opinions as it has individuals. But you would think, if there really was something to be afraid of, some people would have expressed it publicly. I've never really heard any of them say they hope to commit pogroms or genocide or anything like that. And I'm sure there are some exceptions, people who want to commit wanton violence against white people or Jews, but they are clearly far, far less numerous than white people who want to kill and subordinate black people. The US is full of white supremacists who form militias to intimidate or even hunt people of color, trans people, or whoever else they don't like. And in some places, the police help them out, or else just turn a blind eye. I've seen and read about and heard about so many peaceful protests by black people and indigenous people, and Muslims for that matter, that have been attacked, usually by the police, with tear gas, beatings, dogs, hoses. Plus now they're apparently really ramping up the Gestapo shit, as they're grabbing people and kidnapping them in unmarked vans. But, these protests also get attacked by right-wingers with guns, knives, and even cars ramming into them. Police and the right perceive any threat to white supremacy as a threat to themselves. And in a way, because they're so invested in the violence of white supremacy, it is. And that's why they think it's fine to use violence to defend it. Well, that system is killing black people. So why wouldn't they rebel against it? But aside from white supremacists, most white people's fears of black power are unfounded. White settlers have always been afraid the natives or the black people were just about to rise up and kill all the white people. I don't know how many people ever actually believed that, and how many just fed this fear for their own purposes, but to history, they're the same people. But it's really hard to find any examples from history that could reasonably explain these fears, other than propaganda. Every time in history that I know of, when a white person has asked, "What do black people want?" there's been some variation of what James Baldwin says here.
I don't want to be given anything by you. I just want you to leave me alone so I can do it myself. And it also overlooks another very important thing. Perhaps I don't think that this republic is the summit of human civilization. Perhaps I don't want to become like Ronald Reagan or like the president of General Motors. Perhaps I have another sense of life, which in fact my situation here has forced me to trust. And perhaps I know more about you and your institutions than you know about me. And perhaps I have a judgment on them. Perhaps I don't want what you think I want.
You leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. I find the black and other colonized people I've listened to have a much more robust understanding of freedom and justice than the white people. And I think there's more than one reason for that, but I think one is probably that experience has taught them to question things and just not trust things like the police and the courts and the prison system. Whereas me, I've only learned about these kind of things from books and videos and tweets. In fact, that kind of harkens back to my video on theory and how useful it is. Here's James Baldwin again.
I can only include what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That says a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby has anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks that give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
He's talking about learning through observation, not needing theory, just learning from experience. I've been able to question that idealism that he talks about, settler idealism, I think it should be called, thanks to people like Baldwin. And as I've said before, the fact that I only know about these things from books and so on and not from experience is a great example of white privilege. Anyway, it has apparently been too hard for too many white people to muster this basic respect of leaving each other alone, so it has never been realized. It will never happen as long as people are subjects of the state. States do not leave people alone. The state is where class war is legalized and stamped and approved. If you believe in locking up and killing black people, or maybe just taking away their children, the state is the place for you. The people in the state are the people who benefit from the stereotypes and fears about racial minorities. Their jobs depend on it. Whoever's spreading this racist rhetoric, it's still popular. It's all infused with fear. You can read long posts on social media about how scary this or that group of black people is, and I read what the people they're talking about are actually saying, and it's no different from what heroes of white Americans say, like, give me freedom or give me death. White guy says it, hero. Black guy says it, terrorist. Look at their narratives about the Black Panthers. The Black Panther Party they think of as a gang of black people who went around killing white people, which is pure bullshit. But lots of white conservatives have told me that, or that it's the black equivalent of the KKK, or even worse. It's not surprising. They say the same thing about anyone who says Black Lives Matter today. They really spared no hyperbole to discredit black resistance. Although maybe that's true of most people's hyperbole nowadays. It makes them sound like they're trying to convince themselves, though. They're trying to simplify the world by fitting people into boxes without having to learn anything about them. White power militia, bad. Black power militia, equally bad. They've got the history really wrong. And the thing about the right wing you notice after only 1 or 2 minutes of observing them is, for the most part, they're not interested in learning. Of course, black people know all that, but white people also need to know that, so they realize they've been lied to all their lives, and that there are millions of people online who want to continue to feed them bullshit about contemporary movements. White folks need to get it through their heads that black people don't need to wait for us to give them permission to do what they think is right. They don't need our approval. They're exercising their freedoms now in ways that white conservatives love to talk about. I respect people who defend their freedom, not fair-weather friends of freedom. When black people rise up, freedom wins. When white people rise up, violence ensues. The Black Panthers put structures in place so they could break free of the white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist patriarchy. They knew they couldn't wait around for the government to do it. They knew no corporation or charity was going to give them freedom. So they did it themselves. If they'd been white, they'd be called pioneers today. But instead, they were labeled terrorists, thrown in jail, and even, like Fred Hampton, gunned down in their beds. That's how the state expresses itself. The propaganda spread at the time about the Panthers and the rest of the Black Power movement was pretty successful, as millions of white people turned a blind eye or even an encouraging wink to the state's violence against them. The problem is, when they don't know or don't care that people fighting for justice are being attacked and jailed, they won't understand when other, more militant organizations take their place. After the attempted destruction of the Black Panthers, some of its members formed the Black Liberation Army. They did the kind of thing that scares white people even more than marching through the street carrying guns, like bank robberies and retaliatory killings of police officers. If you have a problem with these actions, you should probably support the current movement to eliminate racism. Otherwise, expect more of this. More direct attacks on the white power structure. It's inevitable. See, the thing about what we now call the civil rights movement historically is it was mostly just black people saying in their day, Black Lives Matter. At first, at least, they wanted just to be treated with the same basic respect and dignity that white people were supposedly allowed. But they didn't get it. They got beaten up and arrested and killed, just like today. Look how they started off. Martin Luther King insisting on nonviolence, organizing with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Congress for Racial Equality. But their interests in equality and integration clashed with the interests of the white supremacist state, so it violently suppressed them. Then they passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which did little more than give black people the basic right to vote that the Constitution supposedly guaranteed them anyway, and which we can see, with hindsight, hasn't really solved their problems. Is it really so hard to understand why they might think appealing to the white power structure would not yield freedom and justice? And the thing is, the peaceful movements are treated the same, almost, as the self-defense movements. Black people get beaten up and gassed and arrested and killed no matter how peaceful they're being. We've seen videos of it. At least if there's a burning police car in front of them, they have some cover. Or maybe they just get harassed and written off by ignorant white people. I saw an example of that while researching this video. I heard about Assata's daughters, which is, I'll let them tell you.
Assata's daughters teaches young black girls how to fight back.
Assata's daughters taught me how to be a leader.
Assata's daughters means the world to me.
Assata's daughters means everything to me.
Assata's daughters is an intergenerational grassroots collective focused on creating and affirming space for young black girls.
We see our organization as a part of a much larger movement that is fighting for the abolition of prisons, of police, of anti-blackness itself.
Now, I'm sure that sounds scary to some white people. Black girls sticking up for themselves probably means white genocide is right around the corner, right? But to me, it sounds great. But let's go down a bit. So what do we have here? 21 likes and 623 dislikes. Never seen that before. This isn't even a huge video, just a couple thousand views. Here's someone comparing them to Hitler, talking about free helicopter rides, which is a reference to Pinochet, General Pinochet, who killed thousands of people by throwing them out of helicopters in Chile. This guy, this is a hate group much like Black Lives Matter. Ugh, okay. This says there, you shouldn't support a felonious murderer. And this one, this is what real racism is. Seriously? Assata Shakur was convicted of killing one cop. And frankly, with the endless stream of lies the FBI puts out, we shouldn't be so quick to assume she was guilty. This was at the height of COINTELPRO, after all. But let's assume for once the FBI was telling the truth. Shakur knew she and her companions could have been killed right there, or else just arrested for the many things she was accused of. But that's not a problem for these commenters. They clearly don't think Black Lives Matter. The tone of righteousness and the hyperbole in these comments make it obvious they're not interested in listening. I wonder how many mass murderers they idolize. Pinochet being the obvious example, but, the so-called founding fathers, killers and slavers, or any president you could name, really, plus soldiers and police. But one woman kills a cop in self-defense, and we have to hate her forever. Well, she was black, so it's unforgivable. If you're black, they'll never even give you a chance to explain. Some whites, again, those who don't know much history, love to insist Martin Luther King Jr., the only civil rights leader they can name, was purely peaceful, and his peaceful example led to peaceful change, which made life better for all African Americans, and all was well. There might be a tiny little bit of racism on the fringes of society, but we're all equal now, really. We live in the greatest country in the world, which is totally just like everything I believe about it. And they throw it in black people's faces. What about Dr. King? You should be peaceful like him. And then Malcolm X and the Black Panthers and other groups came along and they carried guns around. Black people with guns! Yeah. They were the scary black people, presumably because they were saying they were willing to defend themselves, and self-defense is only for white people. Or maybe it's only for when someone breaks into your home, but not for defending yourself against people who want you dead or securing your freedom with your community. Something white people were expected to do had now become a nightmare because black people were doing it too. Naturally, the state and the propaganda machine created all kinds of lies to discredit these groups, and for a white majority that's really bad at questioning propaganda, armed black people became evil, racist, terrorists who wanted to kill us all. So they threw their weight behind the police state to crush any movements that popped up. In our sanitized view of MLK, we remember that I have a dream speech. I have a dream that people of all colors can come together and shop at the mall or eat at Denny's, or however white people interpret it. Hardly anyone remembers how unpopular he was at the time. No one talks about his anti-capitalist stance and his strong opposition to the war on Vietnam. We don't hear about how he and his followers carried guns to protect themselves, or how the FBI pushed him to commit suicide and probably had a hand in his assassination. But possibly the most relevant words MLK had for white people can be found in his letter from a Birmingham jail. It's not too long, and it's full of pertinent info for well-meaning white people. Let's read this paragraph together. Over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who's more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace which is the absence of tension to a positive peace which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season, Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. There isn't a consensus on whether to integrate into the system as equals or to secede from it. After the Civil War and the quasi-abolition of slavery, Frederick Douglass was invited to speak in several places, and he would make the case for extending suffrage to black people. Everybody has asked the question, and they learned to ask it early of the abolitionists, what shall we do with the Negro? I have had but one answer from the beginning, do nothing with us. What I ask for the Negro, said Douglass, is not benevolence, not pity, not sympathy, but simply justice. Sorry, the white power structure replied, we're fresh out of justice. Black people got the vote on paper, but the system kept gerrymandering and redlining, twisting and turning so their vote didn't matter. The thing most people don't get about rights is they can be taken away from you at any time. Listen to the slogans of the current movement. Black Lives Matter. I can't breathe. White silence is violence. No justice, no peace. Do they sound like people trying to start a race war? They just want what's right. And when you see things burning, you know they're done being polite about it. Don't get scared and defensive and patriotic and self-righteous. Things should burn. If that's what it takes to wake people up to racism and injustice and war and poverty and whatever else, that's what's needed. Black people get told to work through the system and protest peacefully, but they've tried those things over and over, and racism and its violence haven't gone anywhere. Really, the only people still saying you have to protest peacefully either are clueless as to how change actually happens, so, most of the white people I know, or they want to maintain the status quo. Black people get told to vote or run for office or try to get legislation passed, but again, they've done that, and it hasn't worked. Why would they have expected it to work? The political system does not exist to liberate people and dispense justice. That's just the empty rhetoric propping it up. Why would black people, or anyone for that matter, try to work through a system that doesn't work for them? I made a video recently, as you can watch, about why passing new laws would probably only serve to pacify resistance while stalling change. The point is, working through the system is a dead end. And fortunately, there are plenty of black activists out there who know that. So you better acknowledge it too, or else you'll keep dishing out bad advice. So some just want equality, but a lot of black people since Douglass have had the benefit of hindsight and reject the idea of integration on the grounds that it's impossible to give black people equality with whites in a white supremacist system. Or that it's undesirable and they can make a better system for themselves. But they aren't legally allowed to extricate themselves from the system. Well, actually, under the Constitution, you probably are allowed to secede, but constitutions aren't worth the paper they're printed on, and the state will still declare war on you, no matter how you say it. An organization called MOVE started in the 70s. In 1981, they moved into a simple communal block in Philadelphia. They were fiercely independent, and the police don't like that. So they dropped a huge bomb on the MOVE complex, killing its members and their kids. The police even blocked the fire department from putting out the resulting fire, which burned down all the surrounding houses. That's what happens when you try to secede. But then, that might also happen if you don't try to secede. Some black people throughout history have tried to secede from the U.S. altogether by taking some part of the territory and governing it for themselves. That makes sense. You need a space of some kind to be free of oppressive systems, and you need to defend it. Don't you think, after all the work black people did building the U.S., they should have the right to be free of it? If things were fair, they would own at least half the wealth in the country and huge tracts of land. But they're settling for just a little bit of land instead. If they craved revenge, there would be white bodies piling up. They don't. If they wanted black supremacy, they'd be trying to take over governments and impose a kind of reverse Jim Crow on people. They aren't. The only reason I could see to oppose their seceding is if the territorial integrity of the entire country, which over its history has continually changed shape anyway, is somehow linked to your self-worth. And to lose it is to lose a bit of yourself that you never actually visited and hardly know anything about. If you're afraid of black activism for black people, but you said nothing about the relatively huge amount of white supremacist activity in the US, were you ever really concerned about black people or freedom or justice as general principles? They're going to do what they think is right without the approval of white America. You could either get scared that you're going to lose something you never really had in the first place, or you could support them. To me, it's an easy choice. There are plenty of organizations and activists I don't know about and I can't spotlight for reasons of time. Go listen to them too. When you listen to black people, whether by reading black history or following black activists on Twitter, you realize they're quite reasonable, and what conservatives and others have come to believe is nonsense. Few black people want revenge, or at least systematic murder revenge. There's no black equivalent of the KKK or one of the many other white supremacist, white nationalist organizations. There couldn't be. Those groups exist to maintain a racist system, not free themselves from one. Black power, black liberation, black nationalism, these ideologies exist to liberate oppressed people. Some groups, it's true, preach hate against white people, and especially Jews. I'm guessing that's a prejudice inherited from the long tradition of European anti-Semitism, spreading to African American minds just like it spread to Arabs in the Middle East. But when black people start hating on whole groups, or even when Ben Carson opens his mouth, you can be sure other black people will criticize them for it. They do it all the time. I don't need to be a part of those discussions. I'm going to stay in my lane and focus on the crimes of white people. It's not like I'll run out of things to criticize. And I refuse to hole myself up in a media environment that talks all about how a store burned down, but not why. Or will report every incidence of a black or brown person attacking a white one, but not the daily violence against people of color of the police and military and border patrol and white power militias. Most organizations interested in black liberation don't preach hate at all, contrary to what you hear about them. I hear them preaching freedom and justice and not taking shit from people anymore. That just makes sense. I mean, how many centuries were they supposed to turn the other cheek? If you're white and you're an activist, that's great. Just follow the leadership of black, brown, and indigenous people. Otherwise, focus on your community. Don't go helping where you're not needed. The least you can do is stay out of people's way and support them in spirit. You don't have to be a part of everything. But, if there's anybody out there who's involved in any of this kind of activism and you really want to give me an interview, great, let me know. Otherwise, keep up the fight.
And I, for one, as a Muslim, believe that the white man is intelligent enough. If he were made to realize how black people really feel and how fed up we are without that old compromise and sweet talk. Stop sweet talking it. Tell him how you feel. Tell him what kind of hell you've been catching, and let him know that if he's not ready to clean his house up, if he's not ready to clean his house up, he shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down.